There is an objectively correct way to program in any language. So let's go over the best way to format your code in Godot using GDScript 2.0. And before we get into this, I know everybody has their opinions on how you should format code, but for today's example and demo, we're just going to go over how the official documentation says that you should be coding in Godot in GDScript 2.0. Now, instead of just walking through the as published style guide, I created an example scene that utilizes these best practices so you can see all of them in motion, and we're going to take a look at that together today, and it's also going to be available on my GitHub. That'll be linked in the description below, and if you want to take a further dive into the style guide, I've linked it as well down below. So now we're in a project in Godot. This is called the Style Guide Demo. This is the player style guide scene. I have a script here that's a player style guide, and first thing to note is I'm using a lowercase word underscore lowercase word underscore lowercase word. This is called snake case, and we will get into all of the type cases in just one moment. But now we're just gonna see, okay, we have a bunch of comments at the top of this scene. Great. I have a code region here that has a little too long didn't read section. This is for if you want to dive a little deeper and have just a quick reference in your projects or up on another monitor. I'll flash it now in case you want to pause and take a look at it, or you can clone my repo or check it out on GitHub. Again, all this information is adapted from the official documentation style guide. In any script, you want to do any annotations. This includes @tool. So @tool, I've talked about tool scripts before in a video that's linked up in the top right of the screen. Basically, they let your scripts and scenes run in the editor. So if you want to move things around the screen while you're still coding them without running the game, you can do that. So first line is our annotation. Now we have our class name. This is whatever you want to name your class, and typically every scene should have a class. This just means whatever all the functions, whatever all the variables, signals are in this script will be under this class. And there are several reasons why to do this, but just know it makes things very convenient for you down the road as you start to make your code more complex and want to reference these classes elsewhere. The next line is your extends. Now this is the class type that your class is deriving from, is inheriting from. Now I, being kind of an older programmer style kind of programmer, that was a fun sentence. I like to do these as one sentence so that you can see this entire phrase. This class extends character body 2D. So that means a player style guide has all of the functionality of a character body 2D and has added on some functionality. Obviously, you know, we can go into more custom resources and classes in the future, so you can have something extend player style guide, but we're not going to get into that today. Like I said, the official documentation says that extends should be on its own line, but if you see in my guides or other people's this on the same line, totally fine. Next, we get to our signals area. And you can see I have a player spawned signal, and this is using snake case, like I said before. Okay, great. Let's take a pause. So if you're not familiar with case types in programming, it's basically how you format your functions or parameters or variables to be able to be more readable and to be kind of in the same format. Really, there are 6 typical case types. They are snake case, camel case, kebab case, Pascal case, constant or macro case, and then train case. And if you use train case, okay, look, you're great, but you shouldn't use train case. They all have different histories and origins, and there's kind of a mixture used in GDScript. So you'll see a few of these, and typically you should stick with one case type for one type of variable, one type of data, one type of function, etc. So like I said, up at the top, we have all file names are in snake case. Great. This is easy. Basically, it just makes it so that there are no capitals, so nothing is case sensitive, and it makes it so that it's more readable with underscores instead of spaces, because sometimes spaces can get decoded very strangely on across different compilers and that kind of thing. So our signals are snake cases. You'll also notice that I have a 2# or hashtag sign comment. These are for documentation comments, and basically that means that they can be decoded into the automatically generated documentation. I want to do a video covering auto-generated documentation at some point, but for now, just know that use 2 of these hashtags for things that you want documented and single symbol comments for notes or line comments and that kind of thing. So describe things with 2 and give yourself reminders with 1. Next, we get to the constant area. Now, all of these use constant or macro case, which is all capitals with an underscore in between every word. Obviously, you can use kind of abbreviations here. So if you want to do like SPN for spawn or timeout, be like TMT, easy, just to make things shorter. And you'll also notice here that this is when I start declaring my types. So technically, Godot and GDScript have inferred types, which means, like in a language like Python, the compiler can just kind of assume what type of data you're trying to set here. So it could take this float out and it would see a 1.2 and it would say, oh, that's not an integer because there's a decimal. So let's make this a float. But there have been so many studies that show that, especially in Godot 4, there are actual benefits to statically typing all your variables. So while you don't have to know all your types ahead of time, it still helps you in debugging and it still does give you whatever small of a performance boost. So I always recommend it, if only so that when you come back and see what spawn timeout is, you know not to set it to 5, you know to set it to 5.0 or something like that. Max currency, here's where we get to another cool feature of GDScript. In any integers and any numbers, you can use underscores arbitrarily. So these underscores are not decoded in any way. To the compiler, this just looks like a bunch of numbers, but this number 10000000005 is so much harder for the human to read. But if you use underscores, it's still the same number to Godot. It still sees that it's 1,000,000,005, but at least to us, we can see, oh, because our brains are trained to think in patterns, we see 3 patterns of 3 digits and then a 1, which means it's a billions place. So there you go. And finally, I have a currency postfix. This will set up a string to do a formatted string. I'll show you this a bit later. Again, we're still using constant or macro case here. Now we have an enumeration for directions. I call them enums interchangeably, but this enumeration, basically, if you don't know what enumerations are, check out my video in the top left. It talks all about enums and why you should use them. But basically, whatever you set the first value to be, they will iterate automatically. So down is 1, left is 2, right is 3. You can also do strings. You can also do all kinds of things. And it's really a nice way to either use things by tags or by bits, or to have like lookups if you want a bunch of constants but want them in one place. So I could have 4 constants for up, down, left, right, but this way I can just call directions and see all those directions at once. It also makes things like switch case statements really nice. So anyway, use enums. Again, here we see that enums are using Pascal case. This is only one word, but I could use directions enum, where the first letter of each word is capitalized. This is because enums sit in this weird space where classes are supposed to be Pascal case, as above in class name, player style guide, and enums are kind of a data class. We're going to treat them like a data class for the sake of this demo. Anyway, I have 4 directions in a direction enum, and as you can see, I have a 2 symbol comments for what the enum actually is, and then I have a single hashtag comment for myself, and I use this keyword note, which automatically highlights as a different color in code. This is for me to know. Note, use an appending comma on the final item in the array. This is something that I don't want put in actual documentation, but it's something for me to remember, something that when I'm reading through the code, it helps me to understand. So this is another quirk of the Godot style guide, where you should always add an appending comma to the final element in an array, in a dictionary, or an enumeration. This is so that if you are to add on a new, let's say up, right, a new direction, In your version control, all there would be this new line of data changed. However, if you didn't have the comment there, you would need to add this, and when you were parsing all of the changes that you'd made in that update, you would see 2 lines were updated. So it makes it a little easier to parse. Obviously, it's not a huge deal. It makes the systems work a little better, at least. So now we're going to continue on into the next region of exports. If you've seen all of my export syntax in Godot 4 video, awesome. If you haven't, you should also check that out. This is just me shilling for myself. Anyway, exports are also variables, so we use snake case for these. Again, I'm doing static typing with calling my directions enum, and I set it equal to directions.up, which sets it equal to 0. Basically, inside, behind the scenes, this system is just running C, which just compiles the directions.up into a 0, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Next, we have our Onready section. And now is when we start to see this prepending underscores in all of our variables. So essentially, prepending underscores mean that these are private variables, private functions, things that are only used within this class. If you're not familiar with private or public members, check out some guides on classes in other language like Python or C++ or C#, where you can see different access levels, basically. There isn't really this sense of access within Godot where we have to declare anything as private or public, but it helps us as coders to see, oh, current direction is only used within this file, within this class, basically. Whereas something like starting direction might be grabbed by an outside class. It might be grabbed by an animation scene somewhere else, or the managing scene, something like that. So that's what the prepending underscore means. It just means, hey, for this scene, this is what a variable is going to be. It's not going to be used outside of this scene. I also have an interesting note here. Instead of doing the money sign for getting a node in your tree on these Onreadys, I use the getNode function. This was also something that was called out in the style guide that's official. I wanted to put both ways in this guide just for all of your reference, and also using an as timer or an as label, calling out what they are as a different type of node, a different type of scene. This just helps the static typing, and it helps you to remember, oh, what type of variable this is. And it helps when you are coding so that you can get better hints while you're coding. So you can say label.text confidently, and it will give you that option. Okay, we're getting really close to the action. Here we see just a local variable, currency. This technically could have an underscore. It kind of depends what the scope of this project is. And I wanted to show you what a setter looks like. I do have a video on SetGets also, but I think it needs to be updated for Godot 4. Regardless, so here when you say currency equals something, it calls this set function, where it says if this new currency is greater than or equal to the max currency, which we saw at the beginning of this 1,000,000,005, then it sets it equal to the max currency. So basically, you cannot exceed the max currency. However, if it's under that, then you set it just equal to the new currency. And then we call a private local variable for update currency label. I'll show you this function in a little bit. But that's a normal kind of setter that can be done almost in line in the actual variable declaration. We have our ready function with a couple function calls. We have a function for despawn player, and here you can see that these again are snake case. I do have 2 symbol comments here above each function. This lets the documentation create documentation of this line before each function. And between every function, I have 2 lines of empty space. So this is pretty typical. It just helps you break up your space visually. Again, all this is pulled from the style guide. You can break or bend any of these rules, but it helps from developer to developer read the code, see the code, and maintain the code, because you never know who's going to look at your code in the future. Here we have a parameter to this function add currency, where we add the amount. As I said before, when you add the new amount to the currency, it sets it equal to currency. And instead of just doing this blindly, it will call this set function and do all of this processing. I'll show that in a little bit. Here we have a take damage function where we pass in damage amount and damage type. This damage type breaks into the bit field as above here into fire, electricity, or poison. You can see this on the right side. You can click into each of these bits. So each just corresponds to one of the bits, a 1 or 2 or 4, etc., etc. So here we grab the adjusted damage. We have an underscore for adjusted damage because it is a local variable to this function. We check if the damage type and an elemental resistance is a 1 or a true. Basically, just if there are any damage types and the elemental resistance that's passed, then we have the damage. And then I left it to do here just so that you would be able to see what it looks like when you put it to do in code. There is an excellent plugin called To Do Manager that will actually have another tab at the bottom of your screen to show you all of your active to-dos and notes and that kind of thing. Super helpful. But anyway, I also have a pass here. And just a note, make sure that you're keeping an eye on all of the indentation. Typically, the editor will warn you if there is any bad indentation, but it's just a good habit to always do, anything that comes within a certain branch, you should have at 1 indentation level. And there's also a case where if you wrap lines that are very long, like if you have this line, you want to do 2 indent levels just to show that it's not within line with what comes after it. Now we go to our update currency label. Again, this just updates the currency label. And here we see our currency postfix, and we do this little % currency. This just takes however much money you have and puts it into that % D from before that we saw in the currency postfix. And it prints a little message here. We have a process function. We override the process function, and I did put a note that underscore delta, this has an underscore in front of it because it's not used, but if you do use it, you would just remove that underscore. And again, the debugger will warn you about this. Just something to keep in mind. Input function, I did not implement this, but I put this here in case anyone would like to implement it. Just some notes here, some to-dos here for things that you can put in there. Then I have a setup launch spawn timer. So whenever we call this function, we set up a timer to be whatever the timeout is going to be. We set it to the spawn timeout by default, or we can pass in a timeout. So you can call this without any parameters, or you can call it with a parameter, and then for different times. Auto start in one shot. I put a note here. This auto start is suboptimal because it would be set every time you call this function. But for the sake of this demo, we're just going to put it in here. And then on the spawn timer timeout, which I do have connected to the spawn timer right here on spawn timer timeout. And basically it just makes the player visible or not visible. Whew, okay. That was a lot to get through, and I haven't covered everything in the guide, so I do recommend taking a look at it if you want to see what they recommend on parentheses. Typically in the guide, I don't agree with how they handle parentheses. They say use fewer parentheses. In a statement, like an if statement, they would say do this without parentheses. But, I come from an embedded background, and parentheses are my lifeblood. So it really helps me be able to tell what is going to be evaluated when. So of course, I'm going to recommend more parentheses. Just make sure it doesn't get too gross. And then also, multi-line statements for readability and some other stuff in there. Using and or instead of an actual ampersand or a bar. That also is just what it's decoded to, but it helps for readability. Okay, so now I made a demo file scene, and basically this is just something where we can see all of this happen in real time. Made a ready function. It just grabs the local player. It grabs the first child of layer 2D and has that locally as the player, so I don't have to always get that player every time I want to use it. I have a button that says I'm going to add a currency amount, and so let's go ahead and play. Here's our player, 0 money, as you can see in the chat. It should be updating pretty soon, so I can say add currency. It says, oh, we're adding this much, 500 million and 2. Great. Max currency is not reached, so the new total currency is 5 million and 2, or 500 million and 2. Great. And then we're going to hit it again, and it'll add another 500 million and 2 up to 1 billion and 4. And then since our max is 1 billion and 5, using that setter logic, it will still cap at 1 billion and 5, even though it tried adding 500 million and 2. So really simple demo here. I just wanted to show off a few quirks of the GDScript 2.0 and Godot 4. This is such a powerful language, and honestly, I wish that I had someone explaining this to me years ago when I first started using it. It's really easy to get into bad habits, but it's never too late to start adapting good habits. And there is always time to, do better at how you code. It makes things so much easier to maintain if you comment well, if you use the right type of phrasing in your code, if you use the right kind of punctuation, and if you just keep up with it. So honestly, very much recommended. again, you can check out the style guide in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. More guides like this coming in the future, covering some simple Godot topics and some medium Godot topics and some really complex Godot topics. We're going to be covering my game, Verdant Vale, other projects that I'm going to be working on, and we're going to be talking about stuff in the Godot landscape. So subscribe, please, and I thank you so much for doing so. And of course, have a wonderful day. Bye, everybody.